The ballroom at the Sterling Grand smelled like money Camille Brooks had never spent on herself. Ivory pillar candles lined the center tables. Catered food she hadn't touched. An open bar she was too tense to approach. She stood near the far wall in the navy blue wrap dress she'd bought on clearance 2 months ago, the only nice thing she'd purchased for herself since 2021, and watched her husband, Darius Brooks, work the room like he'd been born to stand in it. And maybe he had. If you're watching this right now, I'd love for you to comment your country and the current time. I read a lot of your responses, and it's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel across the world. Darius was magnetic, always had been. 6'2", deep brown skin, a smile that could make you forget your own name. He wore the charcoal suit she'd helped him pick out, the one they'd stretched the budget for, the one she'd said, "It's fine, babe, you need to look the part," when inside she'd been calculating which bill would have to wait another 2 weeks. He shook hands. He laughed loud. He tilted his head in that practiced, humble yet confident way that made executives feel like they'd discovered him. Camille had a different word for it. She'd learned it slowly, painfully, over the last 3 years. The word was performance. She watched Franklin Davis, Darius's division director, a broad-shouldered Nigerian-American man with silver at his temples and a voice like a thunderstorm, tap the microphone at the front of the room. The crowd rippled into silence. Champagne flutes were raised. The lighting shifted just slightly, the way it does when something important is about to happen. "Tonight," Franklin said, "we celebrate a man who climbed from junior analyst to senior director of business development in 3 years flat. That's not an accident. That's hunger. That's vision. That is the kind of focused, relentless drive that doesn't just happen, it's built." Applause. Camille clapped too. Her palms were dry. Darius walked to the front, accepted the award plaque, heavy, engraved, the kind of thing that gets framed and hung over a mantel, and turned to face the room. His eyes swept the crowd, found hers for just a moment. Something passed over his face. She couldn't name it then. She would later. "I want to thank the people who made this possible," Darius began, his voice warm and full. "Franklin, the entire Meridian leadership team, my boys Marcus and Dev who kept me sane." Light laughter, glasses raised, and of course, the woman who believed in me when the vision wasn't fully formed yet. Camille's chest tightened. She straightened up. Here it is, she thought. This is the moment. 3 years of double shifts at Mercy Regional Hospital, feet swollen at midnight, cold dinners, skipped vacations, a savings account she'd drained and rebuilt and drained again. 3 years of just a little longer, Cam, I'm almost there. 3 years of loving a dream that wasn't hers, with a ferocity that should have been. This was the moment it all meant something. Darius smiled that full, camera-ready smile and said, "Simone Hart, without your mentorship, your belief, and your partnership, none of this would have happened. I want the whole room to know that." The silence that followed was different from the polite quiet of a few seconds before. This silence had texture. It had weight. It pressed against Camille's ribcage like 2 hands. Somewhere to her left, she heard a sharp intake of breath. That was Kezia Monroe, her best friend, who had driven 2 hours from Charlotte for this party, and who was now gripping her champagne flute like she was considering throwing it. At a table near the front, a woman stood. Beautiful. Natural hair pinned up, a deep wine-red dress that fit like it was designed specifically for her. Simone Hart pressed her palm to her chest like she was overwhelmed, glanced around the room with glassy eyes, and mouthed, "Thank you," to Darius. Darius nodded, long, slow, intimate. The kind of nod that answers questions people hadn't even asked yet. Camille didn't cry. She was surprised by that. She'd imagined this kind of moment before the betrayal reveal, the public humiliation, and in every version she'd constructed in her head, she cried. But standing there in the clearance wrap dress she'd told herself was perfectly fine, with 100 people in the room suddenly finding the floor or the ceiling incredibly interesting, Camille Brooks felt something she had not felt in 3 years. Clarity. It arrived cold and clean, like the first breath after breaking the surface of water. Every sacrifice, every skipped meal, every double shift at 2 a.m., every "not now, Cam," All of it rearranged itself into a single, devastating picture. She had built this man, and he had just thanked someone else for it. In front of everyone. The question now wasn't whether her marriage was over. The question was how she had gotten here. 3 years, 4 months, and 11 days before that moment in the ballroom, Camille Washington had been the happiest she'd ever been in her adult life. She was 29, working as a registered nurse at Mercy Regional Hospital in Atlanta, renting a 2-bedroom apartment in Decatur that she loved fiercely and irrationally. She had a worn loveseat from the Salvation Army, a spider plant named Gerald, a collection of crime novels on a crooked IKEA shelf, and a life that felt like her own. Then she met Darius Brooks at her cousin Tasha's Labor Day cookout, and everything she thought she knew about herself quietly shifted sideways. He had walked up to her with a plate of ribs and a confidence that should have been annoying but wasn't. "You're Tasha's nurse cousin," he'd said, not a question. A statement like he'd already gathered the relevant intel. "RN, yeah," Camille had replied without looking up from her food. She'd been burned enough times by the charming man routine to know the opening line rarely matched the rest of the chapter. But Darius hadn't tried to be charming. He'd asked her a real question. What's the hardest part of the job? Not the physical part, the part nobody talks about. She'd looked up then, and she'd told him about Mrs. Gloria Hendricks, a 67-year-old diabetic patient who had nobody to call when things got bad. How Camille had held her hand during a procedure because the woman had flinched at the word alone. How she'd gone home that night and cried in the shower, not from sadness exactly, but from the enormous weight of witnessing a human being in their most vulnerable moment and knowing she wasn't allowed to carry it home. Darius had listened, not nodded while waiting to talk, listened, actually listened. "That's a specific kind of loneliness you carry," he'd said quietly. "Second-hand grief." She'd never heard it named like that. By midnight they were still on the back porch, everyone else gone inside, the summer air thick and warm around them, talking about everything. His childhood in Memphis, her mother Dorothy's iron expectations, his years of feeling like he was born for something bigger than his current data entry job at a mid-sized logistics firm, her secret dream of one day opening a small wellness clinic in her neighborhood. "Tell me about the clinic," he'd said, leaning forward. She'd laughed it off. "It's just a someday thing." "No," he'd said firmly, without an ounce of condescension. "Tell me." So she had. 2 months later, they were inseparable. 4 months later, he'd moved into her Decatur apartment. 6 months later, he'd proposed on the rooftop of their favorite soul food restaurant with a ring he'd saved for quietly, without a fuss, without dramatic fanfare. Just Darius, down on one knee, saying, "I want to build something real with you, Camille. Not a life, a partnership." She'd said yes before he finished the sentence. What she hadn't known was that a partnership, in Darius's vision, had a very specific structure. He would dream. She would hold the architecture in place while the dream took shape. The dream arrived, fully formed, 6 weeks after the wedding. They were eating takeout on their bed, Camille just off a 12-hour shift, still in scrubs, when Darius turned his laptop toward her. A business development boot camp. 12 weeks. Taught by Franklin Davis's consulting firm, Meridian Growth Partners, one of the most respected names in Atlanta's corporate landscape. The program had a 94% hire rate. It cost $11,000. "I know the timing isn't ideal," Darius said carefully. Camille looked at the screen, then at him. He had a hunger in his eyes she recognized from that first night on Tasha's porch, raw and real and terrifying in the best way. "What's the timeline?" she asked. 3 months for the program, then I'd be job hunting. Maybe another 3 to 6 months before I'm pulling a real salary. He paused. "We'd need to live on your income." Her income as a single nurse. Their rent, her car note, his student loans, their groceries, utilities, her mother's occasional emergency. She did the math in her head in about 45 seconds. It was brutal, but it was possible barely if she picked up extra shifts. She looked at her husband, at the hunger and the hope and the specific vulnerability of a man who had finally found his direction and was terrified someone would tell him to turn around. "Okay," she said, "let's do it." It was the most consequential sentence of her life. What she didn't know yet, what she couldn't have known, was that Darius had already registered for the program. He'd just needed her to say yes first. The alarm went off at 4:47 a.m. Not 4:45, not 5:00. 4:47 because Camille had calculated, with the precision of someone who runs on 12-minute margins, that she needed exactly 13 minutes to shower, dress, eat a banana over the kitchen sink, pack her lunch, and be in her car by 5:00 to beat the I-20 backup and hit Mercy Regional by 5:30 for the early shift handoff. This was her life now. She worked the 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. shift in the cardiac care unit, then picked up a per diem second shift at Northside Medical 3 days a week, 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., catching whatever units needed coverage. Pediatrics, ortho, post-op. She was good everywhere because she had to be. She was reliable because reliability was the only currency she had to spend. On the days she worked both shifts, she ate in her car. Always the same. A container of leftovers she'd meal prepped Sunday night, or a protein bar, or sometimes just coffee, and the understanding that the body can run on adrenaline longer than any nutritionist would recommend. She came home and Darius would be at the kitchen table with his laptop, boot camp materials spread around him, case studies highlighted in yellow and pink. He'd look up when she walked in, kiss her temple, say, "You eaten?" Even though she had, and something about that small question made her feel like herself again. Those first few months, that question saved her. She'd sit across from him at the table, her feet elevated on the other chair because they ached like they were trying to leave her body, and he'd tell her about what he'd learned that day. Supply chain analytics, business development metrics, stakeholder management. She didn't always follow the specifics, but she followed his excitement, and that was enough. "Franklin gave feedback on my case study today," he said one night, eyes lit. "He said I had the sharpest market analysis in my cohort." "Of course he did," Camille said. "Cam," he'd reached across the table, taken her hand. "We're going to get there, I promise you." She believed him. That was not stupidity. That was love, which sometimes looks identical from the outside, but feels completely different from the inside. By month 4 of the boot camp, Darius had secured an offer from Meridian itself. A junior analyst position, mid-range salary, nothing glamorous, but real. A start. He'd come home with champagne and her favorite jerk chicken from the spot on Moreland Avenue, and they'd celebrated like they'd already arrived. What neither of them acknowledged that night was the math. His starting salary barely covered what they'd been spending on his loan minimums, and his new work wardrobe, and the professional development events Franklin encouraged his hires to attend. Camille's double shifts weren't supplementary anymore. They were load-bearing. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself that over and over with the same calm, measured cadence she used with anxious patients. "This is temporary. You are safe. Just breathe." Kezia saw it differently. "Girl, I'm just saying," Kezia said during one of their Sunday phone calls, her voice carrying that particular mix of love and alarm that Camille had known since the 7th grade. "You haven't taken a day off in 5 months. When's the last time you did something just for you?" "I do things for me," Camille said. "Name one." Long pause. "I bought a new journal." Camille Renee. "Kez, he's building something real. I'm not going to pull the rug out from under him right when momentum is picking up." "Nobody said pull the rug. I'm saying stand on the rug, stand on it with him. Equally." Camille shifted the phone. "It's temporary." There was a pause on Kezia's end. The kind of pause that means I hear you and I disagree, and I love you enough to let this go for now, but not forever. "Okay," Kezia said finally. "Okay. Just don't disappear into his dreams so completely that you can't find your own anymore." Camille laughed it off. But that night, lying in bed while Darius slept soundly beside her, the sleep of a man with no 4:47 alarm, she stared at the ceiling and tried to remember the last time she'd thought about the wellness clinic. She couldn't. It had been there, vivid and specific, on Tasha's back porch 3 years ago. Now it was something soft and distant, like a song you remember the melody of but can't quite catch the words. She closed her eyes and told herself, after this phase, after he's established, then it'll be our turn. Our turn. As if she hadn't already been waiting. Nobody announces when they start changing. That's the cruelest part. There's no memo, no marked date on the calendar, just a slow, almost imperceptible shift, like a door that's been closing by millimeters for months until one morning you realize the light is gone. Camille noticed it in small things first. The way Darius stopped asking if she'd eaten. Not dramatically. Not one day he asked and the next he didn't. It just faded. By month 8 at Meridian, he'd come home talking about his day before she'd had a chance to put down her bag. By month 10, he was often still at the office when she got home from her second shift. By month 11, she was eating alone 3 nights a week and telling herself it was because he was working late, which was true, and because that was what this phase required, which she was less and less sure about. The weekends changed too. They used to have a rhythm, Saturday mornings slow and easy, coffee and the news, whatever felt right. Now Saturdays were networking events, lunch meetings with colleagues, quick calls that stretched 2 hours. Darius had become someone people wanted access to, and he had decided that access was a compliment worth honoring. Always. "Babe," Camille said one Sunday morning, standing in the kitchen doorway with 2 cups of coffee. "I thought we were doing the farmer's market today." Darius was already in his blazer. "Marcus got us into a breakfast with this guy, David Park, who just sold his second startup. Cam, this is a connection I can't pass up." She looked at the 2 cups, steam rising from both. "I made your coffee." "I know." He crossed the room, kissed her cheek, took the cup, drank a fast sip, set it back down. "I'll be home by noon, promise." He was home by 4:30. She didn't mention the 2 cups. She should have. That was the thing she understood later. Every time she swallowed a complaint to keep the peace, she added a brick to a wall she didn't know she was building. It felt like grace in the moment. It felt like sacrifice for something bigger. But sacrifice without acknowledgement is just erosion. And Camille was eroding in plain sight, slowly enough that even she couldn't see it clearly. What she could see, what became impossible to miss, was how Darius talked about work. Not the work itself, but the people. Certain people. A name that started appearing in his sentences with the same regularity that weather appears in small talk. "Simone thinks we should restructure the client outreach model." Simone ran point on the Henderson account. "Woman is a shark." "You'd like Simone, Cam. She's driven like you." Camille filed it away without fully examining it. She was too tired to examine much of anything by then. She was working 60-hour weeks on average. Her lower back had started its protest around month 14 and hadn't stopped since. She was taking more Advil than she probably should have been and had not mentioned it to a single doctor because she was a nurse and nurses always believe they are the exception. It was her mother, Dorothy Washington, who said it first. Dorothy called every Tuesday evening, as she had done since Camille left for nursing school, and the calls were a ritual, part debrief, part spiritual check-in, part the particular brand of direct commentary that only mothers and best friends have the clearance to deliver. "Tell me something," Dorothy said one Tuesday in month 15. "When's the last time Darius asked you about your dreams?" Camille paused. "He asks about my day all the time." "That's not what I asked." She tried to remember. She went back through the weeks, like shuffling through files in a cabinet, looking for a conversation about the clinic, about her goals, about what Camille wanted when this phase was finally over. She found nothing. "He's busy, Mama. He's in a big growth period." "Mum," Dorothy's hum carried generations of unspoken wisdom. "And what period are you in, baby?" Camille didn't have an answer. That night she sat on the edge of their bed and looked at her husband's side, neat, undisturbed. He wasn't home yet, and felt something she hadn't given herself permission to feel in a long time. Lonely. Not the second-hand grief she'd described to Darius on Tasha's back porch all those years ago. Something more personal. A loneliness that lived inside a marriage, inside a shared lease and shared last name, inside the architecture of a life that had been constructed almost entirely around someone else's blueprint. Her phone lit up. A text from Darius, late night. Big pitch TMRW, don't wait up. She set the phone face down. She didn't cry. She didn't spiral. She just sat there in the quiet of a bedroom that smelled like the man she loved and felt, for the first time, the specific chill of being invisible to someone who was supposed to see you best. She got up, set her alarm for 4:47, and went to sleep. Because there was a shift in the morning. There was always a shift in the morning. Month 18. It happened the way these things always happen, not in some dramatic confrontation, not in a moment designed for revelation, but quietly, sideways, in the produce aisle of a Whole Foods on a Tuesday afternoon. Camille had a rare 2-hour gap between her morning shift and an evening in service training. She was moving through the store on autopilot: spinach, sweet potatoes, Greek yogurt, those specific granola bars Darius liked, when she heard a laugh. She knew that laugh. She looked up. Darius was standing near the prepared foods section, not in his usual work uniform of blazer and slacks, but casual, real casual, like weekend casual, like I didn't plan on being seen casual. And beside him, close, the kind of close that has its own language, was a woman Camille recognized without ever having met. Simone Hart. The name she'd been hearing in her kitchen for 4 months had a face. A very beautiful, very present, very alive face. Natural hair out and full. A laugh that came from somewhere unguarded. And a hand, just briefly, just a moment, that touched Darius's arm to punctuate something funny she'd said. Darius saw Camille at the exact moment she saw him. The laugh died on his face. A beat, one single beat of naked, unguarded expression. And in that beat, in that fraction of a second before he recalibrated, Camille saw something she would spend the next several weeks trying to reinterpret as anything other than what it was. Guilt. Cam, he crossed toward her immediately, smooth, controlled, the recalibration complete. Hey, I thought you had a shift. Gap between shifts. She looked at Simone. Her voice was level. She was good under pressure. 18 years of nursing will do that to you. Hi. Simone extended her hand. Simone Hart, I've heard so much about you. Darius talks about you all the time. Her smile was warm. Her eyes were careful. You're the nurse, right? Cardiac unit. She knows where I work, Camille noted. That's me, Camille said, shaking the hand. What followed was 4 of the most perfectly ordinary minutes in Camille's memory. Darius explained they'd run into each other, grabbing lunch before the afternoon pitch, he said, and that Simone was a senior strategist at Meridian who'd been invaluable on the Henderson account. Simone said all the right things, professional, friendly, zero excess warmth, nothing you could point to, nothing you could frame. That was the thing, there was nothing to point to, and somehow that made it worse. They said goodbye. Simone moved toward the checkout. Darius walked Camille to her car because that's what husbands do. He kissed her, told her he'd try to be home for dinner. She drove back to the hospital. She didn't say anything, not then. But something had been rearranged inside her, quietly and without her consent, the way an X-ray reveals what's been broken long before the pain announced itself. She called Kezia on her break. I saw her, was all she said. Kezia was quiet for 2 full seconds. Was it bad? No, that's what bothers me. It was nothing. It was completely normal. He introduced me. She was nice. Okay. She knew I work cardiac care, Kez. Another pause, longer this time. Come on, Kezia said quietly. You can't read into everything. She knew. He told her specifically where I work. Why would you tell your work colleague specifically where your wife works unless that colleague is someone you talk to about your life? Kezia didn't have an answer. I need you to tell me I'm being paranoid, Camille said. You're being paranoid, Kezia said. Flat and automatic, the way you repeat a thing someone needs to hear even when you don't fully believe it. Camille went back to work. She got through the rest of her shift on autopilot, vitals, charting. a patient in 4C who needed her IV repositioned, a family in the waiting room who needed the kind of careful, measured honesty that never gets easier no matter how many years you do it. Darius was home for dinner. He made pasta. He asked about her day. She watched him across the table, searched for something, found the same face she'd been looking at for 3 years. She wanted so badly for the answer to be simple. The pasta was good. She washed the dishes alone. He took a call after dinner. She couldn't hear what he said, but she heard the register of his voice, that warmth he kept in a specific compartment for specific people. She turned the faucet up louder. And washed and washed and washed. She gave herself 2 weeks. 2 weeks of internal wrestling, of watching, of running through scenarios and possible explanations, and the specific story a person tells themselves when they're not ready to lose something yet. She functioned. She went to work. She came home. She was present in the ways that mattered most and absent in the ways that were starting to matter too. On a Thursday night, 18 days after the Whole Foods moment, she sat Darius down. He'd just come home later than usual, which was itself a data point she'd been collecting, and was hanging his jacket on the hook by the door when she said, quietly from the couch, "I need us to talk." Something moved across his face, there and gone. He sat down in the armchair across from her, not beside her, the armchair. "Okay," he said. She had practiced this. She had the sentences lined up, reasonable and measured, because Camille did not come to arguments with ammunition. She came with questions. It was a habit born of the ICU, where you never assumed, you always asked, because the difference between an assumption and a diagnosis could cost someone everything. "Are you happy?" she started. He blinked. He'd expected something else. "What?" "In our marriage, are you happy?" "Of course I'm happy. Cam, where is this?" "I need you to answer it plainly, Darius, not reflexively. Think about it and answer it." He looked at her for a long moment, and to his credit, and this is what made it all so much more complicated, he did think about it. She could see it, the machinery behind his eyes turning. "I love you," he said finally. "I love our life." "That's not what I asked." "I know." He leaned forward, elbows on knees. "I've been stressed, Cam. The promotion track, the client pressures, it's a lot. I know I've been absent. I know that. I'm going to do better." She nodded slowly. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to understand that I'm asking it from a place of love, not accusation." "Okay." "Okay. Is there something between you and Simone that I should know about?" The silence that followed lasted approximately 4 seconds. In 4 seconds, she noted the slight stiffening of his spine, the jaw setting, the way his eyes didn't quite meet hers in the first instant before they did. "No," he said, firm, clear. "No, she's a colleague, a mentor, actually. Franklin assigned her to help me get up to speed on the strategic track, that's it." "Why does she know where I work?" "Because I talk about you, Camille. I talk about my wife. Is that a crime?" She held steady. "You've been more distant, I've noticed." "I'm in a pressure cooker at work. I told you this phase would be intense. You agreed to it." There it was, slight, almost gentle in its delivery. You agreed to it, as if her sacrifice was something she'd consented to rather than something she'd been running on fumes to maintain. "I agreed to support your dream," she said carefully. "I didn't agree to disappear." "Nobody said you were disappearing." "Darius," her voice was quiet and absolute, "when did you last ask me about my wellness clinic idea?" The question landed. She could see it land. He opened his mouth, closed it. His eyes shifted, not evasively, but genuinely searching, the way you look for something you know you put somewhere and can't locate. He couldn't answer, and they both knew it. "I'm not trying to be unfair," Camille said. "I'm trying to tell you that I am running on empty, and I need to know that this is still a partnership, that my dreams still exist in this marriage, that I exist in this marriage." He crossed to the couch, sat beside her, took her hand, and for a moment, for one fragile, real moment, he was the man from Tasha's back porch again. Present, focused, seeing her. "You exist," he said. "You are everything. I'm going to do better. After the promotion push is over, I promise you, Cam, we refocus on you. The clinic, everything, I promise. She looked into his eyes. She believed him. That was the last time she would. The promotion announcement came down on a Wednesday. Senior Director of Business Development, a 32% salary increase, a corner-adjacent office, Franklin's personal endorsement in the company-wide email. Darius called Camille from the office parking lot, voice pitched with a joy so pure and uncontained that for a moment, just a moment, she felt it with him. Felt the completion of something they'd started together, even imperfectly, even bruisingly. We did it, Cam, he said. We actually did it. We, she noted, the pronoun he used in private. The party was planned for the following Friday. Camille threw herself into it with the energy of someone who needed this to mean what they'd said it meant. She confirmed the venue. She helped select the menu with the event planner. She texted Marcus and Darius's other friends the logistics. She bought the wrap dress. But the Thursday before the party, the night before everything, she found the text. She hadn't been snooping. That was the thing she'd never fully be able to explain to people, the thing that mattered more to her than she expected. She'd picked up Darius's phone because her own was charging across the room, and she wanted to check the weather. She'd pressed the home button, and the screen lit to an open conversation with a name she recognized immediately. Simone. The last message in the thread was from Darius. Tomorrow night is for show. You know what's real. 5 words and a period. Quiet and devastating and precise, the way true confessions always are. Her hands went cold. She put the phone down, exactly where she'd found it. She walked to the bathroom and ran the water and stood there with her hands under the stream until they warmed back up. She looked at herself in the mirror, all of herself, not just the face but the whole picture. The woman standing in a bathroom at 11 p.m. in her nursing scrubs after a 63-hour work week, and she made a decision. She was going to that party. She was going to stand in that room in her clearance dress. She was going to watch. She was going to let it happen exactly as it was going to happen, because she needed for the truth to be visible, not just to her, to everyone. She had spent 3 years being quiet and reasonable and accommodating and small, and she understood, standing at that mirror, that the version of herself who would walk into that party had to be different. Not explosive, not vindictive. Just done. She called Kezia. I need you to come, she said when Kezia picked up. To the party, please. What happened? Just come. I'll explain everything. But I need one person in that room who knows the truth before it comes out. A beat, then. I'll drive down tomorrow morning. Kez. Don't. I'm already looking at directions. Go to bed, Camille. Get some sleep. Don't confront him tonight. I know. You're sure? I'm sure, she exhaled slowly. I just need to see it all the way through. I need to see who he really is in front of everyone, because I already know who he is in private. I just need the room to know too. She went to bed. Darius came home at midnight, smelling faintly of somewhere she couldn't name. He climbed in quietly. She kept her breathing slow and even, the practiced stillness of someone who has learned to function in the dark. He whispered, I love you, Cam. She said nothing. He was asleep in 7 minutes. She stared at the ceiling until 4:47 came. And then she got up. The sterling grand was everything Camille had expected, and nothing she had wanted. She and Darius arrived together because that was still the shape of her life, side by side, the appearance of unity, the practiced performance of a partnership that had long since begun its secret dissolution. He held her hand in the elevator up to the ballroom. She let him. His hand was warm. It had always been warm. That had once felt like safety. Now it just felt like information. Kezia was already there when they arrived, looking like a woman who had driven 2 hours specifically to bear witness to a reckoning and intended to be fully present for it. She wore a cobalt-wrapped dress and had her hair pressed and had, Camille noticed immediately, positioned herself near the far wall with a direct sightline to the entire room. She caught Camille's eye across the space and gave a single, slow nod. I see everything. I'm here. Camille nodded back. The evening unfolded in stages, the way formal events always do: cocktail hour conversation, the careful navigation of professional hierarchies, people who knew Darius, and people who knew of Darius and the very specific performance required in each interaction. Camille moved through it with the skill of someone who had spent 2 decades navigating high-stakes environments where the wrong tone could cost something precious. She met Franklin Davis properly for the first time that evening. He was warmer in person than his reputation suggested, a large man with a careful intelligence behind his eyes and a handshake that communicated genuine respect. "Darius speaks highly of you," Franklin said, holding her hand a beat longer than perfunctory. "He told me you were instrumental, the sacrifice you both made to get him here." "I'm proud of him," Camille said, and found that she meant it, and found that this was somehow the saddest part of the entire evening. That the pride was real, that the love was real, that real things had been taken and used and offered to someone else. "Your husband's a driven man," Franklin continued. "But drive without character is just speed in the wrong direction. I've been watching how he's been operating lately." Something subtle moved through his expression, not quite a frown, not quite concern. "I hope the success is good for your family." Camille looked at him. The careful, precise way he'd phrased that sentence didn't escape her. "I hope the success is good for your family. Not I hope you both enjoy it. Not you must be so proud." He knew something, or suspected it. She filed it. "Thank you, Franklin." She found Simone shortly after, across the room, near the bar, wearing the wine-red dress that had clearly been selected with intention. Simone saw her, didn't look away. That was what surprised Camille. She'd expected guilt or avoidance, the body language of someone who'd been caught. Instead, Simone held her gaze for a full, steady beat, then looked away first, slowly, like a door closing rather than slamming. "She knows I know," Camille understood. "And she came anyway." That told her more than the text had. Kezia appeared at her elbow. "You okay?" "Yeah. Red dress is here." "I noticed." "Cam," Kezia's voice dropped lower, "you don't have to stay for this. You can walk out right now and I'll be right behind you." Camille looked at her best friend. At the loyalty in her face, the readiness, the 20-plus years of showing up that lived in that expression. "I'm staying," Camille said. "He's going to say something tonight in front of all these people, and I need to hear it said. I need it witnessed." And then she looked toward the front of the room, where the podium stood, where the plaque was sitting on a draped table, where her husband was working the crowd with that full, brilliant, magnetic smile that had once made her feel chosen. "And then," Camille said quietly, "I let go." Franklin tapped the microphone. The room gathered itself into silence. And Camille stood in her clearance dress, with her best friend beside her and 3 years of double shifts behind her, and waited. "Tonight, we celebrate a man who climbed from junior analyst to senior director of business development in 3 years flat." Franklin's voice filled the room. The applause was genuine. Camille could hear that. She could also hear the particular quality of silence that followed, the held-breath anticipation of a crowd that had gathered to witness a crowning and expected something worthy of memory. Darius took the plaque, turned to the room, found her eyes. In the half-second before he began his speech, Camille looked at her husband and understood something she would spend a long time putting into words. She was seeing him clearly for the first time. Not the idealized version, not the projected version, not the version she'd been sustaining on hope and exhaustion and love. Him. Exactly him. And she felt, beneath the grief and the anger and the devastating clarity, a small, fierce, impossible-to-extinguish sense of relief. "Now I know." Darius spoke. His voice was warm and full and exactly calibrated for the room. He thanked Franklin. He thanked the team. He named Marcus and his friend Devin with easy laughter. And then, with the practiced precision of a man who had thought carefully about this moment, who had, she now understood, chosen deliberately, he turned his eyes away from his wife. "And of course, the woman who believed in me when the vision wasn't fully formed yet." Camille's heart hammered. Around her, people were leaning in, ready for the moment. The wholesome, expected, complete-the-story moment of the devoted husband crediting his devoted wife. Simone Hart, without your mentorship, your belief, and your partnership, none of this would have happened. I want the whole room to know that. Tomorrow night is for show. You know what's real. The silence arrived. And it was loud. The kind of silence that happens when 70 people simultaneously understand something and simultaneously decide they don't know where to look. Glasses that had been half raised. Hands that had been ready to clap. Frozen. The room became a photograph. Near the front, Simone stood. Beautiful, composed, performing surprise with the skill of someone who had rehearsed. She pressed her hand to her chest and mouthed thank you. Kezia made a sound beside Camille. A sharp, involuntary exhale that was not quite a word. Franklin Davis, behind the podium, went completely still. His expression did not change. He was too experienced for that, but something behind his eyes shifted, adjusted, recalculated. Camille did not move. She stood with her hands relaxed at her sides and her face quiet and her eyes on her husband, and she let the moment be exactly what it was. She didn't cry. She didn't look away. She didn't perform any version of devastation for the room. What she did, what she would later barely remember consciously deciding to do, was lift her chin. Just slightly, just enough. Darius finished his speech. Applause came, obligatory and uneven, the sound of a crowd trying to recalibrate. He stepped away from the podium. He looked back toward where Camille had been standing. She was no longer standing there. She had walked calmly, steadily, head level to the coat check. She retrieved her wrap. She texted Kezia, lobby. She walked through the ballroom doors. She did not look back. In the lobby of the Sterling Grand, with its high ceilings and cool air and the distant sound of an event continuing without her, Camille stood alone for exactly 30 seconds. Just breathing. 30 seconds of breathing that were the most honest 30 seconds she'd had in 3 years. Kezia pushed through the doors, 17 seconds after she did. Didn't say anything, just stood beside her, then put her arm around her. "We're getting in my car," Kezia said, "and you're going to eat something real, and then we're going to talk." Camille exhaled, long and slow. "Okay," she said. Behind them, somewhere in the ballroom, she could hear voices. A different quality of conversation from before, lower, faster, the particular hum of a room processing something it hadn't expected. She didn't need to be in that room anymore. The truth had announced itself with or without her. She pulled her wrap around her shoulders. Walked toward the door. Didn't look back. Camille filed for divorce 9 days later. She told Darius on a Sunday morning, the kind of Sunday they used to spend slowly, coffee and newspapers, and the specific ease of 2 people who'd chosen each other. She told him at the kitchen table. Quietly. She had the paperwork in a folder. She slid it across to him and folded her hands. He looked at it for a long time without touching it. "Cam, I'm not angry," she said, and she meant it. The anger had come and gone in the 9 days between the ballroom and that morning. She'd cried 3 times, once in Kezia's car, once in the shower, once alone at 4 a.m. on a shift break, sitting in a supply closet with her back against cold shelves and her knees to her chest. But she was not angry at this table. She was something clearer. Something she recognized from nursing, the particular focus that arrives after a crisis has passed and the real work begins. "I'm asking you to sign these," she continued, "and to understand that this isn't about that night. That night was just the moment the truth got loud enough that I couldn't pretend not to hear it. This is about 3 years of me shrinking so you could grow, and me doing that without ever once asking myself whether you would have done the same." Darius said nothing. He looked at the folder, then at his hands, then, finally, at her. "I loved you," he said. The past tense was not a weapon. It landed between them and sat there, honest and broken. "I know," she said. "I loved you too. I still do in the way you love something that shaped you, but I loved you like a project. Like a dream I was running double shifts to afford, and somewhere in that I stopped being a partner and became a resource." She paused. "I should have seen that sooner. That's not blame, that's just what happened." He signed the papers 2 weeks later. He moved out of the apartment, and Camille kept the lease. She kept Gerald the spider plant. She kept the crooked IKEA bookshelf and the crime novels and the worn love seat and all the parts of the life that had been hers before she'd offered it up wholesale to someone else's vision. 3 weeks after he left, she sat down at the kitchen table with a notebook and wrote, in clean lines at the top of the first page, Camille's Wellness Clinic, Phase 1. She cried while she wrote. Happy is the wrong word for what it was. It was something older and more complicated than happy, the feeling of returning to yourself after a very long journey, the specific ache of recognizing your own face in a mirror you'd stopped looking at. Kezia called every day that first month. Sometimes they talked for an hour. Sometimes they just stayed on the line while both of them existed in separate rooms, and that was enough. Franklin Davis called once. Professional, appropriate brief. He said he was aware of some internal developments at Meridian. He didn't elaborate, and that if she ever wanted a contact in the business wellness space, she should reach out. That his firm had been quietly exploring health sector partnerships for 2 years. She wrote down his number. Dorothy came to Atlanta for a weekend in October. She stayed 3 nights, cooked 2 full dinners, rearranged the kitchen in a way that was slightly annoying and deeply comforting, and on the last morning sat across from her daughter with coffee and said, I always knew you were stronger than that situation. I just needed you to know it too. I knew, Camille said. When? About a week before the party, when I found the text. She wrapped both hands around her mug. I thought I'd fall apart, but I just got clear, like when you've been running on adrenaline for hours and then the shift ends and your body catches up to your mind. Dorothy nodded slowly. What are you going to do with all that clarity? Camille smiled. The first full, unhurried smile she could remember in longer than she wanted to count. Build something, she said. For real this time, something that's mine. She started the clinic consultation process the following January. A small, 4-room wellness center in her Decatur neighborhood focused on preventive cardiac care and community health education, the specific intersection of everything she knew and everything she cared about. She partnered with a local nonprofit. She wrote the business plan herself. She applied for a small business grant and got it on the 2nd attempt. On the day the lease for the clinic space was signed, she sat in the empty room, bare walls, concrete floors, light coming through 2 wide windows, and thought about that back porch at Tasha's cookout. The night Darius had looked at her and said, Tell me about the clinic. He'd made her feel seen, in that moment, like her dream was worth stopping everything for. That hadn't been a lie, that had been real. She believed that. It had just been the last time someone else's belief was required to make it feel true. She didn't need that anymore. She pulled out her notebook, opened to the page that said Phase 1, drew a line through it. Wrote Phase 2. She looked out the window at her neighborhood, the same streets she'd driven for 10 years, the corner church, the kids on bikes, the older man who sold fruit from a cart on Saturdays, and felt something she recognized, finally, as her own. Not someone else's dream wearing her face. Hers. Earned, fought for hers. If you believe that no one should pour 3 years of their life into someone who won't even say their name at the finish line, hit that subscribe button. And if you know someone who's been running double shifts for someone who stopped seeing them, share this story. They need to know they're not alone. Everyone else, welcome to this channel. We tell the truth here.